y en dado caso que ustedes tengan preguntas con respecto a la conferencia, intentaré ayudar a traducir sus preguntas al profesor Smith. Profesor Floyd Smith es maestro de la Universidad de Mississippi, maestro en literatura inglesa. Ha hecho publicaciones de los artículos P.L. Moller, Kierkegaard, Adversary, en el Journal of Byron. Y el otro es Work of Opposition, the Narrator of Byron's from Juan and Telemachus of the Postscript, Soren Kierkegaard Newsletter de St. Olaf College. El profesor Roy Smith ha recibido los premios de la Universidad de Mississippi al mejor graduando, ha recibido la beca de Edmund Howard Kierkegaard Library en St. Olaf College y ha recibido el premio al mejor graduando en el Clarion University Outstanding. Entonces le damos la bienvenida al profesor Roy Smith. Thank you for coming and welcome.
Gracias, Jennifer. Buenas tardes y gracias. My title is Kierkegaard as Critic, Mapping His Methodology in a Literary Review, with continual reference to from the papers of one still living. As Kierkegaard writes in his journals, great geniuses are essentially unable to read a book. While they are reading, their own development will always be greater than their understanding of the author. End quote. Kierkegaard was undoubtedly a genius, and given his penchant for immodesty, one suspects that he probably had himself in mind when he made this declaration. Yet Kierkegaard's second monographic essay in literary criticism, entitled A Literary Review, would seem to belie his remark on the reading abilities of geniuses. In the review, Kierkegaard offers an enthusiastic and perceptive reading of Thomasina Gyllenborg's Two Ages, a novel which portrays two distinct historical periods, the Age of Revolution and the present age. In its tripartite structure, the review moves from a survey of the novel and its aesthetic interpretation to socio-political conclusions about the two ages. Thus, while Kierkegaard did use the novel as a vehicle for his own ideas, he also read it, and many other books as well, with great thoughtfulness and appreciation. In my paper, I will attempt to articulate the critical methodology of Kierkegaard's A Literary Review, and to isolate what is decidedly Kierkegaardian about this methodology. Throughout this discussion, I will also make reference to Kierkegaard's first monograph, From the Papers of One Still Living, so as to gauge his development as a critic over the course of his authorship. Kierkegaard's From the Papers of One Still Living performs a dissection of Hans Christian Andersen as a person and as a novelist, focusing particularly on his novel, Only a Fiddler. But Andersen had already drawn fire from Kierkegaard in the latter's papers after the publication of his play, Agent and the Merman. As an aside, it is intriguing to note that Kierkegaard explores this same story in Fear and Trembling. The first performance of Andersen's play took place in Copenhagen on April 20th, 1843, shortly before Kierkegaard left for Berlin for a second time. Andersen's biographer, Jens Andersen, speculates that somehow the playwright learned of Kierkegaard's private criticisms of him. In retaliation, Andersen, in May of 1838, published a fairy tale entitled The Galoshes of Fortune, in which a copyist is transformed into a parrot with a Kierkegaardian coiffeur who then chatters on philosophically. Of all the animals, Andersen may have chosen the parrot in particular for its grating squawk, so as to allude to Kierkegaard's notoriously rasping voice. In reply to the publication of his mildly scurrilous tale, Kierkegaard spent the bulk of the summer sharpening his critical edge against Andersen. Although his much more aggressive approach may have discouraged Heiberg from publishing from the papers of one still living in his journal Perseus, Kierkegaard found a willing party, ironically enough, in Andersen's own publisher, C.A. Reitzel. Like either or, the papers of one still living are supposed to be based on found manuscripts, but where it was the editorial pseudonym Victor Eremita who publishes either or, the papers of one still living have been published by S. Kierkegaard. Please note the variant form of Kierkegaard's family name, which please note the variant form of Kierkegaard's family name, which suggests that its spelling had not yet been fixed in 1838. As Julia Watkin avers, the book's title may refer to a future suicide, or to the fact that Kierkegaard remained alive despite his frailty and a family curse that promised to strike him dead before he turned 34. From an intertextual perspective, the title caters heavily to the contemporary Danish literary market's demand for papers and letters of the deceased, which was stoked by the